St. Anne's Parish Hall on this beautiful fall afternoon. I'd like to begin this afternoon by acknowledging that today's performances are taking place on sacred land that's been the site of human activity for over 15,000 years. We're gathered here on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And today, the city of Toronto, or Toronto, is home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're very grateful to be able to work and present music and arts here on this land. Thanks everyone again for coming out. My name is Jonathan Bunce, aka Johnny Dovercourt. I'm the co-founder and artistic and executive director of Wavelength. I want to thank some folks for making this event possible. Thanks to Music Ontario for co-presenting tonight, and thanks to them for bringing out the momos. They are free, so if you're hungry, don't be shy to ask for some momos and get served some delicious. They're from Logo's Corner, is that right, Emmy? Logo's Corner, let's hear it. Thanks, Music Ontario. Thanks to Will for doing sound, Mike for working the door, Shuli for working, Mike for working the projector, Shuli for working the door, to Jake for doing the live stream, Leanne on the socials, and Dave, our production manager, who makes it all happen. Special thanks to Emmy and Sam from Music Ontario for proposing this collaboration, and to Matt Ryan from Trip to the Moon Marketing, who helped get the word out about our report since we launched it last year. And I want to thank a few other people who help make all our events possible, so it's my pleasure to recognize the support of Ontario Creates, Factor, Ontario Arts Council, Toronto Arts Council, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Department of Canadian Heritage, Beehive Design, BlogTO, Great Lakes Swimmers, Great Lake Brewing, Adamson, and the SOCAN Foundation. Let's hear it for public funding for the arts. I think I slipped the Great Lake Swimmers track on the playlist, which is all Ontario artists, you may have noticed. So we're here at St. Anne's Parish Hall, and this space is going to be Wavelength's home base for our shows for the foreseeable future. And we're currently in the midst of installing our new sound system and lights, which you'll be able to hear in action this Friday, November 1st, for the album release show for Anastasia Minster. And we will be building a stage to improve sightlines at our future events. So please do follow us on socials at Wavelength Music and sign up for our newsletter at wavelengthmusic.ca and stay up to date with all our events. And Music Ontario, what's your website again? music-ontario.ca. And Music Ontario have helped curate part of the evening. We'll have a couple of performers along with the presentations and talks. And our first performance is by an award-winning Pakistani-Canadian singer-songwriter who seamlessly blends Eastern and Western sounds. Please welcome Mohsin Zaman.
I ate 2 momos really quickly. That's what's going on. The decision that I won't do it.
very much. It's really nice to be here. This is a very important discussion and topic for everyone involved in the arts, in the music space. So I'm glad that there's a space for us to talk about it. My name is Mohsen. I live not too far from here, college in Ossington, so it was a nice walk. This is a song that I started writing a week ago. I haven't finished it, but I just feel like playing it, so I'm going to play it.
Till he's still waiting. Until he's still waiting. Still
Thank you very much. Is that my time? One more? One more? One more? Yeah, okay, sweet. Cool. How's everyone doing? Yeah? Any questions? Or concerns? I had the beef one. It was good. I mean, if anyone's vegetarian, I'm sure it's great too, you know. I'll play a sad song. Anyone like sad songs here? Okay. Well, you're in for a sad treat. That is true, yes. We'll talk about this after. Yeah. This is a song called By the Way. By the way, that last one, should I finish it? I feel like there's some potential, right? There's some. Okay, cool, good. This is a song called By the Way. It's very, very dear to my heart. I wrote it with a couple of really amazing, talented friends. One by the name of Mike Celia and another friend of mine, Nelson Sobral, but comes from a space of trying to love yourself when it's hard to do so, because we can often annoy our own self, you know.
You always run, you walk away. You are the rain on a summer day. I'm writing this to you right now. I hope you find your way somehow. And on and on and on you run, like a river rages under the sun. I never got the chance to say that I still love you, by the way. And if you fall again, if you're feeling lost in your head, I'll find a way to hold your hand. You can't admit when you're afraid, so you try to pretend that you're always brave. I'm writing this to you with love, to let you know that you're enough. And on you run, like a river rages under the sun. I never got the chance to say that I still love you, by the way. for ages under the sun. I never got the chance to say that I still love you, by the way, that I still love you, by the way, that I still love you.
Thank you very much. My name's Mohsen Zaman, and it's a privilege every time I get to share music. So thank you, Music Ontario and Wavelength, for having me, and let's enjoy the rest of the evening. Cheers.
Let's hear it again for Mohsen Zaman. For those who arrived in the last few minutes, I just want to reiterate that the momos you'll find at the back from Logos Corner are complimentary. They compliment you. So if you're hungry, don't be shy to get up and grab yourself a momo and wash it down with a delicious Great Lakes lager. Thank you. Thanks for coming out to Reimagining Music Venues, a new vision for the future of live music in Ontario. I'm just going to grab this mic and free myself from this stand. Oh, that's nice. There we go. So this event's the follow-up to the publication of the report that we released just over a year ago. So we're live streaming tonight at the Wavelength YouTube channel. So hello to everyone online. If you feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them during the Q&A sessions. It's my pleasure to welcome to the stage my study co-author, Professor Daniel Silver from the University of Toronto, Department of Sociology. Come up here, Dan. Let's hear for Dan. Welcome, Dan. It was great to work with you on that study. It feels like we were saying, like, it's been a year. It doesn't feel like so much has happened, but yet everything's the same. This will be a bit of a refresher. So I'm gonna like music venues. This is the study that came out just over a year ago. We'll talk a bit about the genesis of the study. At the start of the pandemic in March of 2020, I published a book. I've been working on it for a few years called Any Night of the Week, which is a DIY history of Toronto music, 1957 to 2001, which was the view of the past. But during that shutdown time, I started thinking about, well, what's the future of live music spaces in Ontario? So a key thesis of the book was that small grassroots venues are really important incubators for local music scenes. And so that got me thinking, like, maybe there's something here to like do something more forward-looking and more maybe policy-oriented. So I reached out to Dan, and we'd met like 10 years earlier working on a City of Toronto study called From the Ground Up. So we kicked off this collaboration. It was 2 years in the making, and a year later, we're still really excited to share all these findings. So RMV isn't just another music industry study. It's a really unique hybrid academic and sectoral research report that takes an ecosystem view of live music. We had a really interesting methodology, lots of different components, a major survey, stakeholder interviews, field research, focus groups, a student-led design capsule, and some really innovative data analysis. But we started it with one key hypothesis, which is that the standard bar model of live music in Ontario, where the venue takes the bar money, the promoter or the artist takes the door money, that old model is fundamentally broken. So we asked ourselves, how can we conserve existing spaces while making room for innovation and new types of venues? I'm going to throw over to Dan to set the stage here.
All right, thanks, Johnny. It's terrific to see so many people here who are interested in cultural policy, so I hope we'll have a good conversation about it. And, you know, when we were doing this report, we started it, as Johnny said, sort of in the tail end of COVID, and that was kind of a really like a watershed moment, and both in our thinking at the time and then going forward. And what we wanted to do was gather a whole bunch of data that would allow us to understand, you know, where the live music sector was like coming in, what was happening during, and then where we could imagine ourselves going in the future. Now, one thing we find really quickly is that it's hard to understand what's happening in this area, in the live music area, because data is hard to find. The government data is okay, industry data is mostly locked away. So we had to do some creative things to get a picture of what was going on. And so we were really grateful, fortunate that people at Exclaim and Just Shows gave us access to their back-end direct listings, and so I could mine that and get a picture of what was going on, and we had some other interesting data, as you see, going forward. So what these are showing are the trends in active venues in the years prior to COVID, and then well, just up to COVID, really. And the beige line at the top is Toronto, when it's all like spiky like that. That's the raw data showing you kind of seasonal fluctuations, and then we kind of smooth it out. The main thing to see there is that in both, anyway which way we look at it, this is the same thing, just showing total shows, like how much activity there's happening in the cities, is that the decline, there was a decline in live music activity in Toronto, like prior to COVID. Like COVID, you know, pushed something that was already happening. And depending on how you look at it, the decline is starting in 2015, maybe 2018, but something was happening already. The other thing that these graphs show, once you dig into them, which I won't do right now, is that this decline is almost all in Toronto. You just look at like Ontario-wide, it would show, oh, there's some kind of decline happening, but if you break out Toronto compared to the rest of the province, rest of the province is pretty flat, maybe with a slight kind of uptick. Same thing if you look at other cities outside of Ontario. Like if you look at Montreal, there's kind of general increase in activity. So something's happening here, and it doesn't have to be that way, is sort of the main message of those graphs. What else do we see if we dig into this data? We can see that. Now we have to take it with a grain of salt because, you know, it's what's on these listings. But generally speaking, in Toronto, ticket prices were going up steadily in that time, more than in other places. And also, percentage of of sold out shows were going down. So we have this, you know, kind of going on in the years prior to COVID. And then we could also map it. And so you can see what we all know is that there's a big concentration on the left of where the venues are in the West End downtown, which is also the highest rent part of really the country in a lot of ways. And then the bubbles are like how many shows are happening there. So it's bigger when there's more shows happening in those venues. And you can see also that's concentrated in the West End, but there's a little bit more happening in the East, which is something that has been continuing on. So we see a lot of, we wanted to give a big picture of the main patterns ahead of time, and to show that COVID, you know, pushed something forward that was already kind of happening. The other thing we did, and Johnny will talk about it in a moment, is we had some colleagues already doing it prior to COVID, and I carried it forward, is we downloaded all of Yelp for Toronto. And we wanted to, like, all the music listings, all the reviews, and we could use that as a way to understand, like, what was opening, what was closing, and why, like, who was saying what about various venues. We dug into that. Johnny did some data analysis, and he found some interesting things.
Yeah, this was really fun. And by the way, they downloaded all of Yelp. Like, that's pretty wild. So this is really fun. So what we did was, it was called topic modeling. You analyzed the most common topics by keywords, and we took all the reviews of businesses that were listed as music venue in Toronto under that category to establish these 12 types of venue. So some venues are a good place to see a band, others are a good place to go dancing, others are just a nice place to sit and hear a chill concert. And then some of them inevitably got bad reviews. Usually that was related to bad service or a bad vibe at security. So then we ranked the top 20 venues in Toronto in each of these 12 categories. So what was really interesting is we compared that with which venues survived the pandemic and which ones closed. So we had this category called Nice Venue, which is a place with good sound, nice sight lines, beautiful place to sit and watch a concert. Think Massey Hall. Pretty much all but one of those 20 venues survived. But if you look at another category, there was one called Fun Times Chill Edition. 45% of those venues closed since the pandemic. So even though those spaces were well reviewed and had a lot of community support, they didn't make it. And the majority of those spaces were small bars, usually run by a passion-driven sole operator. So we see that some venues are too nice to fail. The larger halls are the ones that could access government subsidies maybe, or fall back on a big financial reserve. The smaller spaces didn't have that kind of cushion. So it really highlighted how precarious this bar model is. I know we don't really want to look back on COVID yet, but one element of our survey looked at the impact of COVID during the early days of reopening. And one silver lining was access to public funding. This really benefited operators and presenters more, but some artists had the time through things like CERB to actually focus on their craft, so that was one silver lining. But it really made people miss the live experience, and these days we don't really see much appetite to return to the days of live streaming concerts. And we also did a piece where we did a tour of Ontario music cities. I'll admit this is a very Toronto-centric event, and the study we did our best in the study to try and have more of an Ontario-wide view, talk to people in Hamilton, Guelph, Ottawa, Sudbury, London, to really try and get more of a view of what was happening across the province. And I admit that if there is a future version of the study, we'd like to make more of an effort to reach out to Northern Ontario as well. So I'm going to jump over to Dan to talk about our stakeholder survey.
All right, thanks, Johnny. One thing I want to underscore about the Yelp thing, too. I don't know if any of you took social science or are interested in that, but we usually can't predict what's going to be predicted with a very high degree of accuracy, which places would open and which ones would have closed, way higher than we usually get in the social sciences. So there's something there, and that's the kind of thing we want to incorporate going forward as we think about how to implement some of these ideas. So we did, like Johnny said, do a survey. We tried to talk to as many people as we could through the survey. Wavelength sent it out through their channels. We got a very good response. We asked people to categorize themselves by their role, like if they're a musician, if they're a owner, if they're a presenter, if they're working in the music sector in some other way, and if they're an audience member. We got overall a very good response. And what I'm going to talk about mostly right now, without going too much into all the data points and stuff, is the main message from a set of questions we asked about what people thought was important about venues, what their perceptions were about venues in their neighborhoods, and then what people thought were the main barriers. And if you put it all together, this little sidebar there kind of has the main message from, if you put all together those different kinds of issues. And the main thing is this. You ask people what do you like about what is important about venues, music venues. You'll get two general types of answers. There's the music itself, and specifically mostly on innovation. I mean, this comes from the fact that we have mostly people who are on the Wavelength listserv probably who are answering, but people go to smaller venues especially to hear new things. They play a really important part in the overall ecosystem in providing a gateway for new emerging acts to get a foothold, and then for people, audience members, to find them. So they have this kind of system-wide function. And then the other kind of thing people will say when they say what's important about it will be what we would call in the social sciences things about our quasi-public goods, like benefits to the broader community, increasing vitality in the neighborhood, being a repository for local history. That's all very important because when we think about sort of justifications, like good justifications for public funding for things, usually it has to include some kind of public benefit beyond just, well, I like this music, so we'll please fund it, right? Well, it should have some importance beyond that, and you can see that people really do kind of have a feeling for that. At the same time, so we see that aspect of it. At the same time, people did agree that the venues reflect, let's say, creativity, but there's a lot of disagreement on how much they reflect the diversity of their neighborhoods. Like maybe a third of the people said, yes, it really does. A third of the people said, no, it doesn't. So we have different experiences of relationships between venues and the local communities that they're serving, something for us to think about and work on. And then there's widespread agreement that venues are threatened in one way or another, that they're not so sustainable at the moment in various ways, business-wise, environmentally, and they could be a lot better in terms of accessibility. Although there is a difference, the owners didn't think that physical accessibility was as big of a problem as everybody else did, which is something to think about. And you see the kind of word cloud summarizing a lot of that. I'm going to go to this one, and this summarizes the other part we asked about, which was mostly about barriers and issues. And the main message is that if it's one way we might describe it is as a kind of somewhat dysfunctional market, where the different components of the system are kind of grinding against each other in harsh ways, or somewhat harsh ways. So what we have is, we ask audiences, what's the biggest challenge you have? They say, well, things cost too much. And then we go and ask musicians, well, what's the problem you have? Well, I'm not getting paid enough, and I can't guarantee funding. And then we ask the owners and the operators, well, what's your problem? Well, you know, my problem, my costs are too high. You have to pay so much insurance, you have to pay so much rent. When you go back to the audiences, they say, well, things are selling out too quickly, I can't get in. And then you go to the producers and they say, I can't get an audience, right? So, you know, everything is kind of pushing in different directions. We got a sector that is actually producing a lot of value for the public, but in a lot of ways it's not in a position to capture it and turn it into revenue that will support its model. So that's what pushed us to think and ask people, well, what do you think about other models that we could pursue going forward that might help to green better? So Johnny pursued
new types of spaces. The least enthusiasm for these types of new models from venue owners, which isn't surprising. They're sort of maybe more interested in the status quo, but they also have the experience and they do know what works. When it came to the futures of new venue models, there was across the board not much enthusiasm for techno-utopian solutions. Almost no one wanted to see a VR experience incorporated into their concerts. People want more of the traditional venue experience, but delivered in new, fresh, more accessible ways, and in simply higher quality. One person said, good sound and clean bathrooms. That's what I want. So putting together all our findings, our report proposed 5 new types of venue model in 3 different categories. The first category relates to the downtown concentration that we pointed out earlier in the mapping exercise, and taking music outside of its traditional locations. One idea is a mobile stage or a stage truck you'll hear more about in a bit. The other is this concept of everywhere as a venue, the idea of music happening really anywhere in public space, like parks, rooftops, beaches. You can see these folks in Hamilton, Fort Elgin. Shout out to Fort Elgin, who during COVID, they built a floating stage near a beach in downtown Hamilton. The second category is making live music a component of some kind of everywhere in Europe, either alongside other ownership models and protecting venues from evictions or display new within the sphere of culture and music. And a report shows examples from around the world of people who are having a lot of success with this model, and a few successful examples from here in Ontario as well. So Dan, we're going to talk about what is to be done.
All right, so one of my areas of research is cultural policy, and generally. We gather up data and we look at policy documents from cities all over the world, and we compare Toronto to dozens and dozens of other cities. And no matter what policy area you look at, culture, whatever it is, Toronto usually stands out as a world leader in one particular area, which is writing the most reports. We are really good at writing and writing and writing. Now that's got a good side, which is that we have a robust conversation about ideas. But the other side is when we have a problem, we say, let's write another report, right? And one thing we really want to do is just not do just another one of those, but think about how we can put together what hopefully has been learned from all those reports and move towards something like, something like action at some point. So what we wanted to do is think about how to do that. First level we talk about is consolidation, which is just looking at the past reports, putting ours into the bin with them, and just trying to say, what do we think we know now, and so we don't have to do another one anymore. Second, we want to add evaluation. the main message from looking at all these many past reports and studies about music sectors in Ontario is that while we have a lot of ideas, one of the things we rarely propose and even more rarely do is figure out how to test them, evaluate them. Did this work? Did this not work? Okay, we should change up. We should adjust, right? You can't do that unless you're evaluating. And then the last one is we had some concrete ideas which we like to talk about with you all and maybe modify them, extend them, and start to actually create them. And those are the implementation kinds of ideas. So really quickly, I won't go too much into this consolidation thing. I'll just say I think there's 16 studies there from 2014 to 2022, Toronto in Ontario, showing itself, again. And for, this is for my sins, I guess, for getting a PhD. I spent a whole weekend of just reading all of those and trying to, put them together and see what they all said. And, on the left side, we kind of have a rundown. And once you read enough of them, you see, okay, there's these recurrent ideas that we find across them. And so, we should just put them in the bin and start to work on them. They're things like what Johnny was just saying, utilizing underused spaces. We've got all sorts of underused spaces in the province and here. We can use them. Organizing the live music sector. That's also why we're here. You have all these different people from different kinds of domains of the sector can work together. Having a music officer. We have one here in Toronto. A few other cities have had them. Thinking about public schools, zoning, the nitty-gritty of zoning and licensing and stuff. That's all really, really important. So we have all that out there. Really now it's consolidating it and figuring out how to implement that. The evaluation side is where we are falling short at the moment, and we can do a lot of work to get better. That's, like I said, testing. Is it really working? And to do that, really the most important in the near term is the thing on the left, creating like a live music ecosystem observatory. That's a place where we can, what we kind of had to cobble together here for our data analysis can be done, more regularly, systematically, pulling together different sources, doing regular surveys, so we can know what's happening and how to get better. And that will help us to evaluate the various recommendations that we wanted to do. But then the most important is to actually come up with some ideas that we can actually rally around and start working on, from across the sector as a whole. And I think you're going to talk about this one, and then we'll go through these, and then we'll pass it on to the panel after that.
Thanks. I want to shout out to Shuli, who welcomed you at the door, who came to Wavelength through this project as a student that worked on this capstone project almost 3 years ago, and is now part of the Wavelength crew. The stage truck was this conceptual design created by some U of T students, including Shuli, who came from different departments and worked together through the School of Cities. So coming out of COVID back in 2021, if you can go back 3 years in time, at that point outdoor shows were still a real key to the recovery. So the stage truck was one of several venue models that we describe in the report, which offers a way of expanding live music beyond the downtown core. So the idea would be to create a food truck for live music as basically a plug-and-play venue, mobile venue that can be deployed across Toronto and around Ontario. Artists and presenters could tap into these previously underutilized, underused public spaces, but at a reduced financial risk. Another exciting idea that came out of the policy recommendations, and that wasn't something you were expecting to hear at a music show, is to create a new provincial charitable organization. We do have strong public funding here in Canada, but we can't expect the government to fund everything. But for many arts groups, the access to private sector revenue is the hardest kind of revenue to access. So this hypothetical foundation could essentially act as a shared platform to raise funds for a network of smaller, more grassroots spaces, and potentially also offer them operational support. So we think there might be a new generation of potential donors whose taste might be more contemporary or pop-leaning than the traditional philanthropic donees like the symphony or the ballet. So if successfully founded, the Ontario Space for Music Foundation could create a new way to access affordable cultural space and also allow arts organizations to diversify their revenue. Continuing the topic of funding, we also recommended that policymakers examine new funding models to support live music. So you see agencies like Factor, they've had huge success developing the Canadian recording industry over the last 40 years. But nowadays, it's touring and live performances where artists generate most of their income. And during the pandemic, we saw this unprecedented new support for music venues, which previously were ineligible because they were for-profit, the majority of them. And guess what? Earlier this month, Factor announced the Promoter Program to pick up where the pandemic funding left off. It's currently labeled as a pilot program, but hopefully this becomes permanent. And Dan has got a big vision to unify everything here.
Well, we'll see. It's something we can talk about. But one thing that really, I think, becomes evident when you start having these conversations is there's little conversations like this happening all over. It's happening here, it's happening in other places, it's happening in music, it's happening in other parts of the cultural domain. And right now it's pretty fragmented. And we need to somehow bring it together to have, something around which everybody can, rally around. And the idea that we can do that, I think, is promising because it's happened before. It doesn't have to happen the same way, but it's happened before. Let me take you back. Some of you may remember, some of you may not, but there was something that came to be known as the Cultural Renaissance that was mostly going on early 2000s. That was a coordinated effort that brought three levels of government together, philanthropy, activists, and so on, that generated something like $250 million early 2000s dollars for the cultural sector in Toronto, and then that sparked a lot more philanthropy. What it did... what were the other ones? A few others. Oh, the Opera Company, Roy Thompson Hall. OCAB was in that too. They were in that too. So it was big, and the justification for it, the idea behind it, was that it's time for Toronto to become a world-class city, take its place on the global stage, attract tourists, and have all the things that that kind of city should have. And it succeeded for what it was trying to do. Now, if you think about all of those things that it funded, they're all in the downtown core, they're all really big organizations, and they're all devoted to the European high arts. And our idea now, or part of the idea, is for some to take that forward and make it deeper, is to democratize it, expand each of those things. It doesn't all have to be to big organizations. The vision of the culture city of the future can be something that's more grassroots, takes place in the neighborhoods. If people are coming as a tourist to Toronto, and you're going to go to the big institutions, that can be fun, but they're the kinds of things you can find in any city at this point. Where Toronto stands out is in the grassroots culture you find in the neighborhoods and outside of the major institutions. Likewise, working in that direction provides people who may live in one part of the city a reason to go to a different part of the city that you may not visit, and not only downtown. That's really important too. And of course, the diversification of cultural offerings outside of European high culture is something I think that most of us want, and also would expand what Toronto already has to offer and make it more evident to more people. So that kind of idea, let's democratize something that happened before to show that we can do it again, rally around from different sources, this idea that we can all be working for the same thing, and perhaps different levels of government can come together and bring the kind of funding and energy that they brought to those kinds of institutions to this kind of grassroots vision that many of us have been excited about and working towards for a long time, but we can codify it. So that's the idea of Cultural Renaissance 2.0 in a nutshell.
Yeah. Dan, I'd vote for you. I would vote for you. I think, and I just imagine spaces like this all over the city, any corner of the city. That's what we're imagining. So thanks for listening. That's been our presentation of the report. You can download it if you can point your device at the QR code. I'll admit, it's a really long report. It's 96 pages. In a perfect world, it'd be a perfect bound magazine. But someone did tell me Kayla told me there's a PDF reader that will read your PDF to you. So I would recommend that, using that feature to turn it into more of an audiobook. So now I'm not pulling out my phone to check Instagram. I'm actually checking the live stream to see if anyone's asked any questions, because we're going to switch over to a Dave Henry says no questions from the live stream. Thanks, live stream folks, for listening. Does anyone here, IRL, have any questions for us about the study? Arilla. Can we do one question at a time, Arella? Okay, so Arella's question was, did we include venues like the Matador, which for those who are too young to remember, it was a sort of an after-hours space on Dover Court that was only open from 1 to 4 a.m. and became very legendary, and more non-traditional spaces like the Holyoke on the concert listing circuit. So I think we even admitted that it didn't possibly capture everything. But Yelp might have had, chasing down individual clubs to make sure that they were included. But we did our best to sort of cast the net as wide as possible. And what was the other half of your other question, Arella? Arella was talking about reimagining start times, using an example of Drum Taberna as a music venue that didn't stick to your traditional, 9 to midnight time frame and has shows around the clock. I remember speaking to Shamez after maybe one of these events, and they said that like one of the reasons they have to do that is just to maximize their food and beverage profits. Is there anything else about the start time that came up in the research?
I think there was a fair number of people in the surveys who were talking about that issue. So I think that, and it would vary. I have to go back and look. It would vary by city. Some cities people would really want it a lot more than others. It would also have an age spectrum too that would go along with it, and that's important to keep in mind. But I think that across the board, when we look at things like alcohol, consumption, and we look at what time of day people want to be there, the age, the aging population is something to really think about for all of these things. So yeah, it's an important point.
Yes. Hey, Brad. Good to see you. Zaphods? And sometimes we. Yeah, someone pointed that Europe has a good work-life balance and good transit. Right down in front. So our friend up front was asking about sort of the economy of scale of DIY spaces and how does it work in a space like this, and especially in terms of other presenters or artists accessing a space like this through us. The short answer is we're working on it, and we're doing that important business planning piece to figure out how we're going to make this space accessible to other users. And because obviously cost is an obstacle, and that's always a barrier. And one of the great things about the old bar model is that there was traditionally no cost for a promoter or artist to access a place like Sneaky D's, a club like that, or the Garrison. The venue owners would assume those costs on taking the risk that they were going to make back their costs from the bar. Artists take the door. Church and state separation. But we've seen since the pandemic that less owners are willing to take on those risks. They're starting to charge a facility fee, charge a rental fee, which, obviously we understand costs need to be covered, but it does create a new barrier for artists and results in higher ticket prices for the audience.
I just want to add to that, because that's like that specific question highlights the more general issue, I think, in a really important way. And Johnny gestured towards it, but if you think about the history of public funding for music, especially in Canada, and as Johnny was saying, historically, of course, it runs through Factor primarily. There's other agencies involved, but Factor is the key one. And that came up at a time when recording costs, distribution, buying records and CDs and all that was the big cost that you needed to support. Since then, that's changed a bit. Those are not necessarily the biggest costs, and it's space. Everything related to space is so much more of a cost. And the cost of that cost is it's harder to experiment. It's harder to experiment with different kinds of things when you have to just worry so much about making rent and covering costs. So if we also, at the same time, if we think about the usual and good justifications for public funding in Canada, there's usually two. One is market failure. The market isn't providing enough of what it should be for some public good. And we can see that's happening. That's starting to happen in this case, especially when it comes to venues. And secondly, to be able to sort of have a presence in the world stage, because we have somebody so big to the south, we need support to be able to continue to have our kind of cultural presence. And that's important, especially in terms of opportunities for new artists and emerging artists. And we see that's exactly where the threat is in this ecosystem. So that's one of the big reasons why this new program in Factor, we haven't studied it yet enough to know exactly what it can do and say, oh, that's the solution, but it's in the direction, opening up the idea that supporting space is going to be hopefully part of the catalyst for offering more opportunities for experimentation. So you can try different things out. You can't do that yet until we kind of shift over some of that idea about what public funding is for, so that it creates that kind of opportunity. At the back there. Well, there is this change in this Factor thing, but the other thing that's happening right now too, that again is a move in the direction, not all the way there, and and the big institutions are important too. We don't want to say they shouldn't exist or anything, but yeah, but it is a big. There's a new City of Toronto culture plan coming out. Actually, it just came out this week. I think it went through committee this week, and it's going on, and so it's. We're going to hear about it, right? But a big feature of that is exactly what we've been talking about, trying to make sure there's a lot more activity happening in more places and more parts of the city and more organizations. So things are moving. Nothing happens fast, but it's moving.
I'm gonna during our panel talk a bit about the give some updates on other things that have happened in the last year. But I think the idea with Cultural Renaissance 2.0 is it's a bit of a call to arms to us, to the community. The change does have to come with us. We have to tell policymakers what we want. We have to get organized. We have to become the people who are finding those donors to support what's happening, what we want to see happen. And we have to, turn governments and policymakers into partners. I think that the idea is government is there to get behind us, get out of our way, get behind us, and pushing this revolution forward. At the back there. Well, there's a huge section on it. I definitely recommend reading the report, and there's definitely a sort of a hunger. We talk to. We talk to people from the community. Through a survey, through interviews, we talk to people to see what they wanted. There's definitely, the community expressed a desire to see more alternative spaces. We didn't yet get into the nitty-gritty of how those work. That's one of the things about a report even this big, is it just opens up so many other cans of worms in terms of, how do you fund alternative spaces? I mean, the whole point about the bar model is that it was this funding system that worked for 40 years. So in many ways, it is kind of the report asks more questions than it answers in some ways, because the whole thing about alternative spaces is that you have to find an alternative way of funding them, right? Whether that's grants, whether that's donations, is it just simply a higher ticket price? The money has to come from somewhere, and that's why we suggested things like this, the idea of this foundation as a way of going beyond your traditional public grant system, which is, again, as it worked for 60 years, but only in the last 10 or 15 years has it even started to trickle down to independent music or things that aren't Eurocentric high art.
Disentangle this combination of the bar and music, which is, I think, is the product of an older era, and you can have these innovative spaces which combine things like theater, comedy, improv. Those are big things now, especially coming out of the pandemic. And a lot of creative people actually engage in all those different things. So, in my opinion, I think those are good options to pursue.
So our speaker here was suggesting, wanted to see more collaborations with theater and comedy and other disciplines, which does track with one of the new models that we talked about, the idea of a multidisciplinary arts center, that there was a lot of expression of interest within the study of that type of usage of seeing music alongside other disciplines. And, I'm wondering, it's sort of up to the community. Like, I'm curious to see, are there artists and presenters in Toronto or across Ontario who are taking on those kind of collaborations? I know, my good friend Emma from the band Bonnie Trash from Guelph had a lot of interest in seeing more collaboration between theater and music, and using theater spaces as an alternative to clubs. Again, throwing the question back to the audience, and sort of, is there anything like that in terms of innovation that you folks are seeing out there? Mike?
There's a really cool place in Chicago called Color Club that my friend Sully started, and it's an all-ages venue. But what it actually is, like an incubator for younger artists, so the more experienced sound techs will mentor young people, especially people underage, and they'll learn how to run a soundboard. And people will do same thing with lighting, and all young bands, all people who can't play in bars. But it's an older generation doing that and having this way to recycle people. But they do have a lot of comedy there, a lot of alternative comedians do stuff there, a lot of music video shoots. So there's a lot of collaboration with theater designers and stuff like that. And I'm really impressed by the quality of work they're doing, and how I'm seeing these names pop up, the bigger artists, and everyone's working together. And it's really inspiring, and I wish somehow there was the funding to have something like that here, because I feel like a big part of it is having no all ages spaces. I remember being 14 years old and going to see matinees at Lee's Palace and stuff like that, and how it doesn't seem to be any model or any talk that everyone's so locked into the bar sale thing, and everyone also is just so risk averse in sort of any litigation and stuff like that, they don't want to take the risk on doing things like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think we probably have time for one more question. I'm going to come back to you, Rella, because I know you've had your hand up for a bit. So, over here.
Was there any report of the correlation between ticket price and what people were willing to pay? I mean, there's people flying in dropping $5,000 to see Swift. Meanwhile, people aren't willing to pay $30, $40, $50 to go see a new local band. So, is there any data on what the price point is, or why people will pay $5,000 but they won't support a local artist?
Our questioner was asking if we did any work on ticket price and what people felt their maximum was, pointing out people paying $5,000 to fly in for the Swift Eras tour, but not being able to be willing to pay a few dozen bucks to support a local band. We didn't really get that in the weeds with ticket price, did we?
That's a great question. We couldn't really figure it out from the data that we have. Probably someone in the industry somewhere knows it, right? And so if we get the right data, we could find out more. But we don't know that right now. But it's a really good question.
I think just again wearing my presenter's hat. It's like post-COVID, battling fandom is so hard right now. It's when you're working to present emerging or unknown artists. Post-COVID, you really sort of, this is more anecdotal than what we touched on in the study, but we saw a real flight to comfort and familiarity, which sort of explains why people, I think, if they haven't been able to see concerts for 2 or 3 years, when they go back, they want to see their favorite band on stage and feel more risk averse. So and that sort of risk aversion trickles unfortunately down to saying well, I don't know. I listened to their stuff on Spotify and I don't know if I liked it. I don't know if I liked it enough to leave my couch to see this band I don't know or this artist I don't know. But I'm really excited that insert pop artist is coming to town. Irella?
I was thinking about music venues that have closed in the last 5 years, and most often it's because the rent has increased. And I realized that one of the things that I think Doug Ford took away was rent control for commercial spaces. So that's why the Annex bookstore, magazine store is closing, because the rent has doubled or tripled. That's why a lot of places have closed. And I'm wondering, is there any kind of lobbying that you know of that, it would be a great thing to have all the music venues, each say, could you please sign this petition to try to get the government to put in rent control for music venues or for galleries. And when our friend here was talking about that space in Chicago, I was thinking of an alternate space, the Array space on Walnut Street. It's kind of the ideal thing. And if you support them, you get your tickets cheaper, so then you're willing to take a chance on an unknown band. Mm-hmm. So that kind of is another interesting concept. Like if you pay $40 for one ticket and $30 for two, or something.
Mm-hmm. Arella was asking about if there is any sort of grassroots movement to protest the lack of commercial rent control for commercial spaces. And I don't know if there ever was commercial rent control. I don't know if anyone here from the city knows. No, thank you. This never existed. But we can still blame it on Doug Ford, and I'm sure and I'm sure no one would bat an eyelid. But I think that I'm not aware of any sort of grassroots activity to protest that archaic law, and I think that's a great idea, and I would personally sign that petition. Was your other point about alternative subscription models? It's cheaper, yeah. I think that the Music Gallery and Array and a lot of those organizations that come out of the new music scene that were the sort of descendants of what was once 20th century classical music, all had a lot of success with subscription models, and hasn't been really imported as much into the so-called indie music worlds, but it definitely is something that is worth exploring.
Just to underscore some of what you were saying is, when put all that data into a statistical model and you try to explain, what's going on in terms of, the decline. However, which way you look at it, it's rent in Toronto explains it all. Any other variable I put it in, it's rent, and it was happening before Doug Ford even too. So, it's a longer term kind of trend, happening. And that just shows, how much is bound up with the price of land. And it's a nationwide conversation we're in right now about how to handle that. I do want to say, though, one thing that this comes back to is how, in what way because Johnny said something important, this kind of history of similarities, let's say, with the classical music and subscription models. And the other thing that this area could maybe take a page from classical music is philanthropy. And this is why we think this foundation is something that's really important to consider. We have now people who, let's say, grew up on this kind of music and this kind of cultural scene, but they're a little older. They may have a little bigger wallet than they did when they were little. And they may now be thinking about donating to support the kind of scene that, you know, was really important to them when they were younger. And but it does that. But who's in their ear from development officers? It's the opera. It's the symphony, right? And something about this kind of foundation could be really important. Would be to have development officers, that kind of, you know, professional who can be in those people's ears and say, you know, like, this is, you don't have to only give money to those. You can try to support the kind of vibrant ecosystem that you grew up on and you'd like to see continue. Well, it needs to be a charitable foundation, and that's why all of these things are all kind of interconnected.
I think we're at time for the Q&A. So we're going to take a 1 minute, just like shake it off break, and I'm going to invite the rest of our panelists up to the stage. Thank you. So I'm going to sit there. I'd like to calling Andrew Cash and Erica Hennebery and Tanya Tonon and Paul Ramirez to the stage for our panel. Whenever you're, please make your way to the stage when you're free.
You're going to hand me the microphone.
No. I thought you were going to tell me something. You just gave me that look. It was just like the deer in the headlights look. No. Hi, Tanya. I'm Johnny. We met at the Two Make Safe Things show last year. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Hi, Tanya. So you're Tanya.
Yeah, the whole time we were talking about
Yeah. What an amazing show that was. Yeah, exactly. I think you had big hair last year. Yeah. Hey, good to see you. Hi, Paul. We've met before. I'm Johnny. Yeah. Just gonna sort of. Thanks, Mike. That's much better. So yes, please do download the report and read it. bit.ly/RMV report. So thanks. The QR code is gone, but it's on. You can find it on posters around the building. Thanks for attending Reimagining Music Venues, listening to our presentation. Thanks again to MusicOntario for co-presenting. It's my pleasure to welcome our panelists to the stage. We're going to have just sort of free-form discussion about some of the issues and ideas that came out of the study. Thank you so much, Emmy. Let's hear it for Emmy Stancheva from MusicOntario. Thanks, Em. The person you can personally thank for the momos. Yes. Okay. I'm Johnny. This is Dan. Tanya Tonon has been... Is it Tonon? Is that how you say it? Tanya Tonon has been working in the music industry for more than 16 years and is currently the Senior Operations Manager at the Danforth Music Hall. She's also a proud partner at Hard Luck, a venue staple around the corner on Dundas West. Paul Ramirez is the drummer of the Juno-nominated Toronto punk rock band The Flatliners, who have released 6 albums over the last 22 years. In recent years, Paul has become a vocal advocate for the support of live music rehearsal spaces here in Toronto. Erica Hennebury is a queer, urban, and cultural planner, currently working as a Senior Cultural Affairs Officer with the City of Toronto's Economic Development and Culture Division. Erica is co-lead of the Office for Cultural Space. And our moderator, Andrew Cash, is the President and CEO of CIMA, the Canadian Independent Music Association. He was a member of Parliament from 2011 to 2015 and co-founded the nonprofit Urban Worker Project, raising awareness of the realities of making a living in arts and culture. As a musician, he spent 25 years touring and recording, first in the post-punk band L'Étranger, followed by a successful solo career. His Island Records debut, Time and Place, was one of the first CDs that I ever bought. Ain't that cute? Please welcome our panel. All right. I'm going to throw it over to you, Andrew.
Okay. Thanks, Johnny. Hey, everyone. It's great to see so many people engaged in this conversation, so many people that have been engaged in this conversation for decades, I know, are here this afternoon. We're so used to saying tonight because, that's when we usually come alive, is in the nighttime. And speaking of nighttime, I want to start with Tanya. Now, when just to be clear here, when you're a partner of this bar on Dundas West, right?
Hard Luck Bar, to be specific.
Hard Luck Bar, to be specific. That means you're a co-owner?
Yes.
So I guess the first question I have, and you...
Risk, but I don't think I would have had the guts to start my own place from ground up. I more became a partner there because my current partner, George, who owns Sneaky D's, clearly knows what he's doing. And he needed a partner at Hard Luck at a time where someone was leaving. So I took the opportunity because I knew the business. I knew it was sustainable, at least at the time. A lot of change, we'll get into that. But it was a no-brainer for me because of what the business was. Had it been different, had it been me starting my own place, I definitely probably wouldn't have done it.
And why not?
Because of all the risks involved. It's really hard to build a reputation from ground up, especially at the time there was a lot more venues to compete with, where I knew Hard Luck did have a really good reputation, and I was a bartender there before I bought in as an owner. So I did have this sense of family there, I guess I could say. So I was a lot more confident getting involved in the business because I already knew it.
And is it, I've been there.
You get that sense. It's not just a place to go see shows. We do have the regulars, not only just people coming to see the shows, but bands as well. Because we've created a space where from musicians to staff to patrons, we create an environment that's fun, it's safe, and it's a place that you keep going to because it's the same faces every time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. With some new ones, of course.
Yeah. And Paul, I wanted to ask you a bit about the challenges around rehearsal and in Toronto. And I think this is happening all over Ontario. Frankly, all over Canada. Really, is just the squeezing out of anything that is not paying full market rates that are set by oftentimes foreign-owned multinationals purchasing buildings and becoming landlords. And, you know, if I go through the city and I remember the rehearsal spaces that I've had, and I know, like I had a suite space in what's now called Liberty Village, that building's gone. I had a rehearsal space on Gordon Avenue, which is right around the corner from here, and that space is gone. Just tons of spaces are gone. And people music fans don't really think about how music's made. They just listen to the music, right? And we need to explain how music's made. And I do want to really just applaud you for, you know, pushing this issue around rehearsal spaces, because it's vital. And maybe you can speak a bit about a couple of the situations that you've been really engaged in, because they're quite interesting.
I play drums.
Yeah,
so
and
something
there's that too.
You can't do at home. I have a really great neighbor who has drums himself, but there's a difference between you know, somebody who's learning how to play drums and somebody who's trying to prepare to go on tour or anything. The big dissolvement of rehearsal spaces was during COVID, but it wasn't because of COVID. Rehearsal Factory owned a majority of the spaces in Toronto. They dissolved not because of COVID, but because they dissolved their business. The partnership that owned it decided to sell all the buildings. Some of them were already sold and were slated to be demolished, and just were inhabiting those spaces until that due date. We don't want to be necessarily, like, you know, bands don't need to rehearse on a main street. You know, that's why I think Geary has always been a safe bastion for it. Like, we don't mind being beside railroad spaces, or, you know, we're making loud music that we don't want to feel inhibited by. Our singer has rented a cabin to go out in the middle of the woods to loudly yell, scream, you know, to record demos, because even in Hamilton where he lives, he feels like he's somewhat inhibited by making noise, making music in his own space. So it's just about Toronto's expensive, and your neighbors are right beside you. So I likened it when I was trying to explain rehearsal spaces to normies, that it's like a gym. Like, you know, most people don't have enough space in their home to work out. It's the same for a musician. Like, I cannot play drums fully uninhibited or without devices that mute the drums or the cymbals, or using an electronic kit even. In my own space, you know, I can't do it uninhibitedly. We're lucky. Our space still exists at Lakeshore in Islington. Lynx took it over, and I think we should applaud businesses like Lynx and Made Stage Rehearsal that took over the existing and still functioning part of the old Rehearsal Factory on Geary. And those are the businesses, those are the institutions that we should sort of be supporting, because you're right, it starts at a rehearsal space, and if we're not going to have those spaces, we're going to be left to a world of no drums, no loud amps.
What? No drums? Really? No, come on.
I mean, we don't have to plug in to exist, but people can't hone their skills if they can't do it, you know. And we already know about the housing issue in Toronto, obviously. So it's sort of an afterthought to most musicians, whether they're going to have a space in their own home to be able to make music or not.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that you're raising here is that the owners of that rehearsal space business closed it down. For whatever reasons they did, and they sold the businesses. And I think about some of our venues, live venues that are sort of bedrock Toronto venues, like the Horseshoe, for example. You know, well, why is that still around? Well, I think it's around because the owners still like it to be around. You know, and that could change, right? And so that, I guess, brings us to the city of Toronto and this new strategy called Culture Connections. And I just wonder if you want to speak a bit to some of these issues raised and how they connect to Culture Connections.
Yeah, sure. I'm an urban planner, but I actually got my start as an artist, and I'm from Nova Scotia and worked in the indie rock sort of world there. And so I made lots of spaces by, you know, kind of renting them out with friends and making plays in them and ripping up the old carpet and like working in bars and picking up cigarette butts and, you know, like kind of knowing how the spaces run from the inside. So it's really weird and interesting now to be like on the planning side, looking at it from kind of the outside. And so I guess I could tell you a few things of what the city is sort of up to right now. Basically, 2022, the city established a new office called the Office for Cultural Space, and they hired myself and my amazing colleague, Mojan Shinfar, who is not here today, but she's also a planner with background in arts and culture and public space. And yeah, they kind of just hired us and said, run with it. You know, there's all kinds of stuff to do. There's a million capital projects going. There's all these programs that need sort of pulling out of the fire, and we need a culture plan. So we're kind of running with that. Mojan was really, really instrumental and really held the pen on this new culture plan that just went through committee last week, and it's going to hopefully be just approved with no debate by council in a couple of weeks. And what that allows us to do is basically gives us direction and resourcing to be able to do a whole bunch of new things. And some of the targets are very ambitious. For instance, like it's a 10-year plan. And we've established a target to develop 1 million square feet of net new cultural space in the next 10 years. And so there's a strategic investment, you know, 35 million over the next 10 years, 10 million just to Toronto Arts Council over the next 5. So there's a lot of like really specific targets and investment behind it, and staffing as well, which is really important. So there's all kinds of other things that we work on. You know, we work on policy and planning. We do program development. We're developing a new cultural districts program, which is really taking an anti-displacement lens to cultural investment in the city, looking like neighborhoods like Little Jamaica, Chinatown, Kensington Market, and thinking about that through the lens of displacement and trying to support local cultural spaces. Maybe I'll leave it there because there's a million other things.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to, we'll definitely get back to sort of how cultural policy at say the municipal level and at other levels too. But let's just rest here because you're here. You know that oftentimes is like the invisible hand behind what happens. It's, I think, maybe one of the reasons why Geary is activating the way Geary is now activating, right? But I wanted to ask you, Daniel, about the study, and one question that came, many came up, but one that is maybe like slightly atypical, but why do you think it's so hard to get data about the music industry?
Well, it's a good question. I wouldn't say it's necessarily harder than anywhere else, actually. Okay. It's just hard everywhere. Anytime you have industry involved, you know, like times have changed. Let me give you one example. I was, back when I was doing my PhD in Chicago, we did a big study at the time. It's called Chicago Music City. We actually played a big role in trying to create a music district downtown in Chicago. And this was 2005 or so. And what we wanted to do was measure the grassroots scene. Now, at the time, there was this very big thing on the internet that was called MySpace. And that was if you remember, it was bigger than Google. It was bigger than Facebook. It was like the biggest, website on the internet. And so I was teaching a class, and there was an undergraduate in the class, and I said, hey, we'd like to know what's, going on in the grassroots sector. Can you help me to get that data? And he was like, okay. And he just scraped, downloaded all of MySpace. I mean, 10 million bands. And he gave it to me the next day. And you can't do that now. They have protections on all that stuff that will stop you from doing that. So the way the thing has evolved, they've realized that is, a really important part of their business model. They don't want people getting it so easily. So any industry area is just kind of hard to get. The other big issue that you face in this area and other areas is that when the government is collecting data, they're thinking about different things than we might be primarily interested in. They're thinking about things from the industry, from how much money are people making, if you're set up to pay taxes and stuff is all really important, if you're registered as a nonprofit, but it's hard to measure what's happening in places like this from government data sources. So that's why in a lot of ways it's just normal actually in this business to try to cobble stuff together. So it's not unusual, but it's a big effort to actually put it all together.
Well, I was wondering if that's when COVID happened and the shutdown happened, I mean, many of us, and Johnny and I have been engaged in together in totally different avenues in the past around freelance labor. And when COVID happened and the shutdown happened, it was as though government finally saw that there was this entire other working class, of which most people in the music industry were members. And you know, but that stuff wasn't necessarily counted, right? And that must have been a challenge to you, that sort of kind of the sort of casual way in which we've organized this industry.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm saying, like that. That's a difficult challenge we face. I think especially in this area. I mean, this is where it is something really important, because you have, like, what does it mean to be a worker in this area? You're not necessarily filing taxes. Not everybody is. It's not showing up in the census for that. You know, so you know, this is where we do have to kind of dig deeper. But that's also where it just became, during COVID, it just became evident to everybody that there were all these other kind of categories that are not necessarily being counted. But one thing, just to not go too far into the weeds, this is where the history with the City of Toronto is actually very important. Because like now in the census, we do ask a lot of questions actually about arts employment and arts occupations that they weren't asked like 30 years ago. And at least what I'm told is that the City of Toronto played a big role back then in getting those questions into the census. Because the City of Toronto went to Stats Canada and was like, we want to know this. And the City of Toronto is one of the biggest buyers. If they want it, it's a big buyer of data for Statistics Canada. And those said, okay, we're going to start collecting it. And once they started collecting it for the City of Toronto, it eventually got into the census as a whole. So there's ways that if, for example, the city government starts to think, well, this is important information for us to find out about, it can actually have like a huge impact in the entire data ecosystem that we can actually start to learn a lot more about. So this is something that I think we're interested. I'm part of, at the University of Toronto, something called the School of Cities. These kinds of partnerships and you know, just arrangements where we can say, hey, if we can inspire or push agencies like Statistics Canada to collect the kind of data that we all want, we're sitting here, we're ready to analyze it, we're ready to try to do work with it. We just all have to kind of get on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing that came out in the study was, and I don't know if it came out, you know, like gangbusters, but there was comments around living wage for music workers and for musicians too, and I, you know, we oftentimes don't really have that kind of conversation, and in part because, you know, because people don't pay taxes necessarily, or they're getting paid in cash, and they don't necessarily know what they're supposed to be doing. And I wondered, Johnny, how important that is to the future, or for the reimagining of a live sector in Ontario.
Yeah, that was actually one area of the study that we sort of talked about like going further into, and decided it was too much of a can of worms, but something for a future study, was artist payment. It is because it's a challenge, because there is a musicians union, there is musicians union scale, but it doesn't really exist in this sort of DIY like indie club music world. You know, payment for artists is usually dependent on ticket sale, some weird matrix of ticket sales and grant funding. if you do receive grant funding, if you don't, then you know, artist payment is going to usually be based on how many tickets you can sell. But the idea of establishing a sort of baseline of fair wages for musicians is really, really difficult in this economy where revenue is really, really unpredictable and variable.
Sorry. Okay, I just have this little stat here that in 2023, Live Nation posted $3.1 billion in revenue, and 90 million tickets were sold. And in the mainstream media, there is a you know, an idea that the music industry is like rocking right now, and that live music is amazing, and yet, as one of the folks here mentioned, you know, you can have people spending $5,000 to see Taylor Swift, and you know, kind of
knocking at your door trying to get on the guest list for a show that you're doing where the door is $10. And I'm just wondering, Tanya, in your experience, both like at, you know, the Horseshoe and Danforth and, you know, and your club.
I have a lot of opinions on this one.
Lay it on us. Lay it on us. Okay.
I do like how it was mentioned, the levels of prices. It's a sad reality that the people that are paying $5,000 for Taylor Swift tickets can afford it. Not that they should, but they can. So if tickets are selling for $5,000, they're going to continue to. But if you look at the people that are going to smaller club shows, you know, 300 cap or less, which is where Hard Luck falls under, a lot of them are local bands with local friends. A lot of them are university students. A lot of them are working part-time jobs. They don't have the income to justify a $40 ticket and spending $200 at the bar in one night. It is the difference of who is spending the money and where they are in their lives. A lot of people that we have playing at Hard Luck are college and university students, and the people that are coming to their shows are their friends. Those friends are taking OSAP to go to school. They got student debt. They're trying to prioritize how they're going to pay rent and eat that month. So something as what seemingly is as little as a $40 ticket, they need guest lists for that, because that $40 is either going to drinks that night or going to getting in the door. It is a huge difference of who's coming out. And thank you. But that is kind of the difference. If you're the kind of person that's spending $5,000 on a show, you can. But if you're going to see your best friend's band play and you're in university, that $40 ticket can sometimes seem unattainable. However, on the side of the bands getting paid, they can't really afford to charge less than that. Yeah. If you've got 4 bands playing in one night and they're all trying to make enough money to go on tour, anything less than a $40 ticket means that they're not making enough money to consider this a job. So it is a very fine balancing act of what you can charge versus what people can afford versus what our musicians need to make to be able to play those shows. And that's where you see that at the club level. When you're talking about ACC shows or anything that's like, you know, arenas, stadiums, it's a whole different demographic that you're looking at. The club level is very DIY. It's very hand to mouth with their paychecks. It is very, can I afford to go to this $40 show or that $40 show because I'm in university right now? And that is the difference. It's who's buying the tickets.
Mm-hmm. So as a band, as someone in bands and someone who's been on tour for years, how do you feel when you hear that? What's your response to that?
I mean, I agree with it, and you know, not everyone has the money to buy an expensive ACC ticket. You know, I have friends and colleagues that work for bigger promotion companies, and you know, I've had people coming to me to ask them to get into. I'm tired of using Taylor Swift as an example.
Oasis.
Oh yeah, Oasis. You know, it's sold out.
Tickets weren't that expensive.
How much were they?
Considering they have not been around for 15 years, and this is a reunion that all of us have been waiting for just as long, they were $300. That's not, right? I know, but when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, that is considered for a stadium a cheap ticket. End of conversation.
Today is going to be that.
But in terms of you know, trying to make a living solely from music, how? I mean, I don't want to assume you do or don't, but what I am curious though is it important to do that? Like in other words, is that the main goal here for you?
Yeah, but we've also all had part-time jobs.
Yeah.
No, I shouldn't say part-time jobs. We've all held jobs while we've been in the band. Scott, our guitar player, works for Amsterdam Brewery. For many years, I worked for Bose. I mean, breweries actually provide a lot of jobs to musicians because who else knows how to get heavy equipment into a bar? Yeah. Kegs are about the same weight as a bass amp or a bass cab. So, so there is a big disparity between you know, big rock concerts and your small DIY scene, and the price ticket. I mean, I also ticket redemption on a $20 ticket. I mean, I've also seen that where people don't show up because the ticket was only $20, and then, you know, you think you have a sold-out show, and 3/4 of the room show up. So there's two sides of that coin too. You know, charging too much, charging too little. So you really, it's a balancing act where you need those people to show up as well.
And when this report that, by the way, when are we going to be able to see it?
You can already read it. It's on the website.
Oh, it's already out. Okay.
A lot of familiar faces in the room. I know that many of you participated and contributed to this plan, so thank you so much for doing that. And if you didn't, don't worry. I'm going to be knocking on your door because we're doing a cultural infrastructure strategy. So we're going to be mapping cultural spaces across the city, and want to talk to you guys about this too, and would really like to do community mapping because we don't want to miss anything. Would love to have you guys participate, but also if you want culture to be funded, please show up for the budget stuff. The pre-budget consultations are happening right now. There's a survey that you can go, Budget.to, just Google Budget.to. You can fill out the survey and you can say, we want to see arts and cultural facilities funded, or we want to see more music spaces or whatever. And then there's a consultation tomorrow night as well, so you can sign up for that, 7 to 9, it's online. And again, you can just put forward that you want to see more funding for arts and culture spaces and music spaces and stuff.
Having not read it yet or seen it, I'm just kind of curious about this conversation about how people, arts and culture workers and artists, how they make a living in the city. And I'm just wondering if that's how much of this plan kind of gives attention to that.
Yeah, there's a number of specific mentions in the plan about you know, artists' wages and a living wage. But one of the other pieces of the plan was to bring grant funding up to inflation. So there'll be a boost soon, immediately, that will be indexed to inflation. Because it's one thing that we know is that everybody's expenses has gone up and nobody's funding has gone up for 10 years. So we're, you know, everyone's really squeezed, and people are having to make really hard decisions, and sometimes even giving up their spaces, which we do not want to see. So hopefully this can help in that way.
Is there an aversion to using the word investment instead of funding or grants in your? I guess I'm looking at you guys, and I'm looking at you, Tony.
I mean, the Ford government changed the name of the Ontario Music Fund to the Ontario Music Investment Fund. And yet another new acronym, we had to go from OMF to OMIF. So I think it's, yeah, I mean, the word, it's all kind of a little Orwellian, right? Like the choice of words. So I think that, you know, but you know, I see the message of investment, the idea of there's a return, it's not a handout, you know, that kind of, in the sort of culture war landscape we're in, it's important to get that message across, I think.
Okay. Just to come back to the original question you asked, which is, you know, the premise was, you know, the music industry is going like gangbusters, and, you know, what do we think about that? And I think that's a really helpful framing, because the music industry has been going like gangbusters other times in the past. For example, I remember the day, we all do, I'm sure, that, you know, when it was like $20 for a CD in like 1992 or something, right? And it was going like gangbusters then, but we still had support for music production, public support for record production, for record distribution, Canadian content on the radio and so on, even while the industry was doing well overall in that area, right? So it isn't necessarily the case that if you have a few big players making a lot of money, that means you don't need public support or other kinds of philanthropical support for those other areas. Actually, all the more so, because it's very important precisely to allow pathways for new artists, emerging artists to get in, which they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. But we knew how to do that, or we learned how to do that in the case of recording. And just to be a broken record again, we don't quite have it down for the case of space right now. And that's I think, the really important message.
Just staying with you guys for a second and the report. I'm curious about how you considered cultural communities, immigrant communities, and the music culture that they are creating. And I think about venues that I've been to in Mississauga and Brampton, and also here. you know, we have, if you haven't noticed, a ton of large, for example, Portuguese social clubs here in our neighborhood, and I, you know, had the privilege to be in a lot of them, and they're huge, and there's a lot of music that goes on in those venues, and I'm just curious if you were able to capture some of that data or info.
I think, you know, we really, when we disseminated the survey, it was really important for us to reach as wide, you know, a net as possible. So we reached out to more, you know, organizations affiliated with communities that weren't necessarily from the traditional indie music demographic. So that was really important to us. And like, just wearing my Wavelength hat, we've partnered with our other organizations a lot, like Umanoja Culture, who are doing something very similar to what we're doing in terms of ethos, in terms of mandate, in terms of that community building piece. But their background is in like the Latin Brazilian scene that's sort of more connected with venues like Lula Lounge and Basement 254, which is right in totally occupying the same community as spaces like the Garrison and the Baby G. So all you can do is sort of like is just mindfully, intentionally make sure as many different people are represented when you're doing this kind of research. Otherwise, this is going to be monochromatic.
I'm feeling like it's probably time for a couple questions, eh?
Yeah.
Do you have some? Okay, there's one right out of the gate. Go ahead.
This question I have for Tanya about, you brought up the whole conversation about people paying so much money to go to these big shows. How come we can't figure out a way to find these people who are willing to spend money, so much money to see these big shows and bring them more into the DIY scene? As an artist, like this is something I think about all the time because yeah, I do have to charge a lot for a ticket. But what if I could find a way to bring more people out to my shows? And I'm just wondering how artists and venues can collaborate because I feel like promoters aren't really doing that the same way anymore.
I really like that question, and it's actually a lot harder to answer than it seems. Because, I mean...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So she was just asking people that are willing to spend all this money on these bigger shows, how do we get them aware and coming to more of these DIY shows to support more local artists? And this is something that I actually think about often, and I'm not sure if it's correlated, but I think it could be. We all look at, like, with having the internet, that all this information is just so there for you all the time. And I've noticed this about shows specifically, especially shows at Hard Luck. I'll post something the night of the show of the band on stage, and then someone will send a message to Hard Luck. Most of you are old enough to remember where you went, you could pick up an L, and I might see, oh my God, just down the street at the Rivoli, there's this great band playing that I would have never known about had I not picked up a now. I feel like there is that lack of one space where you can go and check out everything that's going on in the city. Because, like, if you want to know what's going on at Hard Luck, you have to go to our Instagram. If you want to know what's going on at Danforth, you have to go to that Instagram, or you have to go to the related social media pages. I feel like we are lacking that one place that you can go and find out everything that's happening in Toronto at that time. And not just because there's, like, this weekend, but sometimes this weekend is too late. There should be just a place to go where it's like, if this show's happening 3 months from now, but the tickets are on sale, it's already in this space. I think that's a big issue, is not getting the information to enough people, because even though it's there, if you're not searching for it, you're not going to see it. Does that answer your question? That is an excellent idea. Awesome. And like honestly, like something like that, like that's not even something that I even thought about. But that is honestly, it is an excellent suggestion to be like, if you like this, there's more like this happening just down the street in a smaller space.
Do people flyer anymore? Also, like, like Flats used to go to like the bigger punk show at the Phoenix and flyer for our, yeah.
Dan Burke is still around doing shows.
Dan Burke. Yeah, Dan Burke's still working at the Monarch. think that's one of those things that we even talked about. I even thought about this when I was reflecting on the study in the last year. Is there's this element of that passionate operator, that person who's just dedicated their life to it, that's really hard to capture in a sort of data-driven study. And it's like, part of me is like, that's why we included these kind of some more qualitative pieces about, profiling the music cities to try and get some of the personality. So it's, because some of these, especially venues, especially promotion companies, really are, driven by people like Dan Burke or Ron Gaskin, like the R.I.P. Ron Gaskin, if anyone knows him. Like people who really just like lived and breathed the music, and sometimes they can entire music scenes can be sort of built on the backs or shoulders of these people.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting. Okay, well, great. We got some questions, but I just want to quickly. Well, in terms of public policy innovation around what's your name, the artist? BBO. Around say a headlining act. I know during COVID when there was money for live, it was tied in a way to venues actually hiring local Canadians to get on bills with other artists, and I mean that is a possibility.
I think that's in the new factor trial thing too.
Sure, but I mean in terms of, let's say, the property tax assessment for the Danforth Music Hall, or for any venue, that could be an element of sort of local content. Like
a CRTC type vibe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I can see. I would think. Who knows? But I think that would be on the table in these conversations, like a CanCon for for a venue policy.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I just had that thought. All right. There was. We'll get to you, but there's someone at the back there. Yeah.
I just noticed the last little while that music festivals in this region and also elsewhere in North America have really dropped off like a huge cliff, maybe except for like country and bluegrass festivals that seem to be persevering. And I just wanted to know if anyone could speak to maybe some of the underlying reasons for that.
Do you mean dropped off as in closed? They don't exist? Yeah, okay. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Anyone want to take that?
They're expensive to produce, especially in Toronto. I mean, a lot of them have moved up north to Oromodante, but that poses problems in itself. How do you get 40,000 people up to Barrie or Oromodante specifically? I mean, larger companies like Live Nation are looking at the Rogers Center. They have to compete with cities in the U.S. who have football stadiums that can hold 50,000, 60,000 people. And they have to convince artists to come to Canada to get 75 cents on the dollar to theirs and play in front of hopefully the same amount of people. We don't have those spaces. So yeah, music festivals are sort of fell to the wayside because it's hard enough to compete in Toronto, and then the expenses involved with producing those events here are astronomical. I wish we still had, Heavy TO, which was an off branch of obviously Heavy MTL. But you also see, Riot Fest, which, Field Trip, Turf.
Way Home, remember that?
Yeah.
We did Riot Fest a couple years.
Hey, right, yeah.
But you have in your study, you have quotes from, I think, Jeff Cohen or someone saying that the Way Home or Field Trip, I can't remember which one.
Turf was Jeff Cohen's festival.
Yeah. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars in the red for that, right?
You remember Gary Topp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Gary. I think he was like, if you want to work in the music business, the best lesson is to put $15,000 in a paper bag and light it on fire. That's how you that's the trial by fire, no pun intended. But yeah, it's as Paul said and Tanya confirmed, it's a high risk business, and especially post-COVID, insurance has gone up a lot, and there's more liability fear, and you saw bigger events having more safety issues and barricades getting knocked down. And we're seeing more weather events too.
I wanted you to speak to the whole climate change piece and how that impacted some of what you found.
I mean, we were mostly focused on venues more than festivals. We touched on it a little bit. Obviously, every festival needs a venue, but usually it's sort of like the venue of a festival is a site that's sort of built into a temporary venue for, you know, the better part of a week. And but yeah, we were sort of seeing more sort of reports and anecdotal things about, even while we were writing the study, we saw, you know, Boots and Hearts get wiped out by a hurricane. And it's definitely, I think, for the promoters of these events, people are stepping back because there's so many sort of more risk factors, financial not being the only one.
Insurance,
yeah, it's huge. It's huge.
Service charges and individual charges for each, you know, concert. I don't know if anyone else has heard that.
I'd argue it's the other way around because they bought businesses that do really well and continue to produce those events. So, I mean, it could be both ways. I don't know. But I'm not advocating for Live Nation.
I don't know. I hadn't heard that one. But, okay, yeah, you've got a question there? Yeah.
The City of Toronto's invested in It's Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can we talk about how that's going, and is that a way forward? Is there other models? This week, I went to a location which is at 379 Adelaide, and there is Bygone Theatre. It is leased out the 4th floor. It's called The Bridge. So it has studio space, it has office space, meeting space, performance space. And they're doing without public sector right now. It's completely private. I just think, like, how do we invest in, because I think that's a good word, the development of more opportunities like this? And I think the city could play a leading role. So I'm curious to know what's happening there.
Yeah, I mean, It's Okay was such an amazing project, is such an amazing project collaboration. Oh, sorry, David. This is David from Heritage.
No, I mean, it's okay.
Oh. It's okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, if you want to just tell people about it.
Maybe I'll just restate the question too, in case anybody didn't hear. David was asking about It's Okay, which is a partnership between a nonprofit music organization, well, I guess multi-arts organization, and the city. And actually how it came about was a friend of mine who's a planner also was working in the Department of Parks, Forestry, and Recreation, and they had identified this building that they had purchased, this chunk of land they had purchased for future parkland, and she identified this vacant building on the property that was slated for demolition and suggested, why don't we use it for an arts and cultural space? And this idea kind of got kicked along. It's Okay was identified, and so it's a sort of like a meanwhile space. It's this idea of turning over space that's going to be future redevelopment or whatever to arts and culture organizations. So that was a really good example, and it went so well that we're actually looking for another space to move them to when the building does get demoed, because it is going to be a park, and it's attached to the affordable housing redevelopment on that chunk of property as well. So that was a really cool idea, and it worked really well. We're really using it as a template for how to share city space with nonprofit organizations. We also have a community space tenancy program where artists can come and apply for, nonprofit organizations can come and apply for city space, and the space is free. You just have to pay for the utilities. So for instance, there's one up right now, 5220 Yonge Street. If anybody's looking for space in North York, you should reach out to me. So these spaces come up through the development process sometimes, and that's how we usually tenant them. Sometimes we do these other meanwhile things, or sort of bigger projects like Blackhurst Cultural Center is a big project that we're working on. It's a long-term ground lease on city-owned land, and it's a cultural institution. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Erica, for that rundown. And I just want to just say a bit about It's Okay, because it's really exciting and a great new model, and there's a profile of it in the report. I was one of a group of DIY organizations, nonprofit organizations, that got to go on a tour of this space, and everyone else said, we don't have the capacity to take this on. It's Okay was the only one who actually stepped up. They brought their own investment. Even though, yes, they got a space that was below market rent as part of a city partnership, they brought a lot of their own funding in order to fit it out, to program it, to really turn it into a space. And so that's a great example of an amazing public-private partnership.
Okay, Karen.
So I've been a music journalist since my late teens, which is quite a few decades. And I think one area that is also funding is non-existent, support is non-existent, is music journalism. I literally might have to leave the business. There's nowhere for me to write about. I get about 200 press releases a day pitching me on new artists that I would love to write about. I used to have indie columns and a radio show, just things for me to write about all these amazing new artists that became some of the biggest artists in the world. And there's no support there. I too used to get that chart in Now. I would circle it.
That was I.
Oh, that was I? Was it? Okay.
I had the club chart.
Okay. Well, I used to circle that.
Thank you so much.
I used to get those free tickets, to attend all the shows during the week. And, that is how my love for live music grew, how I had a career all these years. And I actually taught music journalism to third-year musicians at Centennial, and I was shocked that they don't go to live music. They didn't know where to go. They thought it was really expensive, which I feel like there needs to be a blitz at all the colleges and universities with free tickets, unfortunately, to get people out to develop this love of music so that when they get older, they can buy tickets for $50, $100, $300. So yeah, I feel like that needs to be done. Even like those yoga studio passes that they have that people can try different studios, something like that for live music venues.
So Karen was talking about the challenges of music journalism, which used to be a real pipeline for people to discover new artists, has sort of really died, and there's no funding that exists to support really much in the way of journalism, especially arts journalism. So that was maybe one suggestion, is there a way that a new funding stream could be constituted to support arts journalism? We've seen the Walrus have some success as a charitable foundation to support news journalism. But Karen was also suggesting other ways of, blitzing the colleges and universities with free tickets, because the younger people are just not going out to live music in the same way that they were maybe when we were in university.
Did that come up in your research at all? The issue of the sort of implosion of music media?
I don't think we talked about that specifically, but it's a great point, and
really
it just points to how many of these issues are interconnected, and I think the fact that it didn't come up is probably an oversight on our part, but it made me think, I used to study classics, and they say Achilles needed Homer, the poet, the hero needs the poet needs the hero. It's the same thing, part of a thriving music scene is that you need to have people writing about it too, and present it to people and say what it means, and vice versa. You need something going on to write about. And the fact that they're both really in a difficult situation is something for us to think about. But they're also, and this is going back, this is why we use the ecosystem kind of approach. These things are all interconnected. So many of the things we're talking about go back to the rent is too damn high, right? 6 words can explain a lot of things here.
Yeah.
And likewise, when we're talking about issues with climate change and so on, a lot of that goes back to urban planning and transit and the like. And we can't, we're just a little blip, here talking about music, on these interconnected issues. We can do our little part, but it's hard to make a dent on it unless we figure out how to put all the pieces together.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I really want you to speak a bit about the cultural land trust idea. Because that's one of the, things yeah.
Well, I want to shout out to the Community Cultural Spaces Trust, based here in Ward 9, who do have some money to create some kind of a cultural space in this ward, which is exciting. Erica's more of an expert than me, so I might throw it to you to talk about a bit of the technical stuff, but there's a lot of the cultural, basically, as I'll try and explain it, community land trust is an alternative ownership model that basically the aim is to make cultural or any real estate perpetually affordable. It's become definitely more common in the affordable housing space. It's only starting to get a foothold in the cultural realm. I had a really important point, and that's that, especially you see in live music spaces, no one owns their space. Almost every single live music operator rents and is at the mercy of commercial real estate that can be just jacked up without any hesitation. So it is this really precarious space, and I think the idea of the community land trust is how can you bring the community together to start to actually acquire spaces that can have a dedicated and perpetually affordable cultural usage.
I mean, that's like a whole other panel.
Yeah.
But it'd be a really great
summit.
panel. So many things. I mean, Jonathan's sister, Susanna, was actually my thesis advisor 10 years ago when I did my MRP on community land trusts. And so the one thing I would just emphasize is that we refer to them as cultural CLTs or cultural community land trusts. We don't want to cut the word community out. And that's happening. It's starting to see the adaptation of the CLT model into the cultural context, and it's amazing. It works super well. There are a few examples: Creative Land Trust in the UK, CAST, Community Art Stabilization Trust in San Francisco, a brand new one called Artist Spaces Trust in San Francisco as well. 221A in Vancouver is doing one. Community and Cultural Spaces Trust here in Toronto, Toronto's first cultural CLT, so excited about that. And
Yes.
lots of different uptake. There's a lot of incredible momentum in the housing sector for CLTs, and they really are breaking through. They have profoundly broken through a serious issue with TCHC in Toronto Community Housing, having a real issue with a massive backlog of SOGR and AODA work, and they came in, Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust and the Circle CLT came in, took over over 700 properties from the city, from TCH, and they brought them up into state of good repair. It's just really a model that works super well. The financial model for cultural space is totally different and wild. That's a whole other panel for another day, but it's such a good model. And if anyone wants to learn more about it, we are all going to be learning about it together and doing some panels coming up and some workshops on it in the coming year as part of our, the city is working with Arts Build Ontario to do a social purpose real estate cultural spaces accelerator program. We'll be posting about that soon.
Okay. Thank you all for participating in this panel, and I think I'll throw it back over to you, Johnny, and to introduce I believe we have one more performer, right?
Apparently, we have some online questions. Should we throw them to the to the crowd?
Yeah.
My God. Accessibility is really important for fans. Moving forward, what are your plans to collaborate with disabled folks and orgs to increase accessibility and inclusiveness at music venues? I'm not sure who they're directing that at, the wider ecosystem.
I can touch on it.
Yeah, please.
For the most part, at a lot of venues, of course, and it is something that is very important. Everyone should have access to live music. The issue with a lot of the older existing venues is the buildings themselves and how they are set up and how some of them, like for example, Hardlook is on the 3rd floor of a building where we don't have the capability of putting in an elevator. It's something we've looked at any possible way to work around it, and because of the way that the building is made, because of the people renting the main floor and the middle floor, there's nowhere where we could construct that. But it's definitely something that we've struggled with at Hard Luck many times. Places like the Danforth Music Hall, for example, that is main floor level, it is a lot easier to renovate and create those spaces. But even if you look at like new places like the Doc Ellis, they just started doing the No Club in the basement of the Doc Ellis. They had kind of like an area there that they didn't use, so they're using it now as a venue. So it's a lot of places in Toronto have a lot of older buildings with stairs involved where we are actively trying to find a way around that, but a lot of places landlords won't let you change the way, like they won't let you put in an elevator because it changes their building that they own. Going back to no music venue owns the building, none of us. So there is a lot of restraint on what we would like to do versus what the building owners will let you do. But it is definitely something that's become a very big thing, a very big conversation amongst all venue owners, is making everything, and that also includes all ages shows. Hard Luck does a lot of them. There's not that many smaller venues that do, but inclusivity across the board is something that is a big topic moving forward. It's, again, finding ways around the barriers that stop you from moving forward.
Exactly, and yes, just to add to that, unfortunately, music does really well in old buildings,
yeah.
which many of which are physically inaccessible, and Massey Hall have done a really great job at making their new space at the Allied Music Center with the TD Music Hall fully accessible. But they're also a big organization that could afford a $184 million redevelopment. The rest of us, the rest of us cannot. But we're going to have to, because in 2025 the AODA is supposed to become, we're all supposed to become compliant. And I think a lot of people are going, what are we supposed to do? And we are doing our sector is having to do a lot of catch up to become more accessible and inclusive. Someone asked, has there been any progress with the live music truck? No, it still remains conceptual, but there is someone in Hamilton that is doing something similar that's more of a shipping container that can be brought in on a flatbed. And Umanoda Culture, who I mentioned, have also got a similar sort of performance structure. So some people are taking up the idea. Someone asked, was the study only researched using Yelp?
Yeah, that was it. We just looked up stuff on Yelp and said that whatever they say, we're going with. No, it was just one component of a lot of other different types of data. And by the way, I guess we didn't mention it too. Johnny went around and talked to people all over the province, talked to people in other countries to learn what they're doing. So we had this kind of rich interview kind of part component of it. Not to mention various sessions that we had that we hosted as well. So there was a lot of different kind of components that went into it.
And the last question was, would these live music truck venues be in specific locations? No, I think that's the whole idea, is that they're mobile and can be used anywhere. Would the promoter have to worry about noise complaints? Probably yes, I would say. But I think that's part of the point, is to get music out of space, dense spaces where the risk of noise complaints, and into areas that are maybe underserved by underserved by cultural infrastructure, and there's maybe more open space. I grew up in Scarborough. I imagine, every time I would ride my bike through Morningside Park, I would imagine there being a music festival there. I'm glad to see there's a lot of ad hoc usage by the communities, people in those communities, to just put on their own festivals where they don't necessarily have permits or get grants, but they obviously provide a lot of value for the community. And something like the stage truck could allow that kind of activity to happen in just a little more of a formal way.
Oh yeah, and just on that note, one of the ideas behind the truck, and who knows if I hope it's something like it happens, is on the model of the food truck. It gives opportunities for people who maybe have a restaurant idea. They can try it out. They're not yet ready to open up like a full-on brick and mortar restaurant, but you can give it a go there, see how it goes, and if it goes well, then go to that. You can also go to places that, neighborhoods, areas that maybe aren't ready to support like a full-on venue in terms of enough demand for it. Just like some places don't have enough demand for a certain kind of restaurant to open up there. But if you can go to them, there's enough demand, for this day of the week, and so on. So that's the idea, to bring that opportunity for experimentation and creativity and mobility that people have experimented with in the restaurant area to try to bring that into the music area. And I think we got a design that is actually pretty good, and it would actually work. Shuli, you could ask Shuli, who's up there. I don't know where she is. But it would be great if we could figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing an entrepreneur needs to come forward to take this idea, which is ready-made, and run with it. But we, as the conveners of the study, we're not the ones to do that. But so that's the question from the live stream. Let's hear it for everyone on the live stream. And thanks, and the rest of Ontario. Thanks. Let's hear it for your amazing panel. And I think we're going to take a little break, have a drink. I don't know if there's any momos left or if they're all gone, but hang out for a bit. We're going to hear one more performance, and then we'll have some networking and hopefully get to chat some more about all these great ideas. folks. A couple of shout outs. I know we talked about the old iWeekly club chart. There is a new version of it called thisweek.to. Check it out online. It's a digital version of the old club chart, which give you a grid of all the shows happening around town, and they're also doing a print version. So check that out. Also, the sound system, you're appreciating the sound lights. Wavelength was funded to purchase this equipment from the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund of the Department of Canadian Heritage. And their program advisor, Kayla McGee, is here, and she wants you to know that there's funding available for venues and cultural spaces. So please do stick around and talk to Kayla about the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund. All right, thanks again to Music Ontario. Thanks again to Great Lakes Brewery and all our funders and all supporters. We're going to wrap up the night before our networking with one last performance. Feel free to come closer to the stage. This band uses music to heal and headbang away from the mainstream. They released their debut EP, The Parts We Could Not Abandon, in 2020. And tonight, they're playing a special acoustic set. Please welcome Cut Sleeve.
Hey, you guys, we're Cut Sleeve. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. As was mentioned, we're doing something a little bit different, taking it down a notch for an acoustic set. So, yeah, cozy in.
Thank you. We were just chatting as a band as we were listening to the panelists and the Q&A and everything, and
Is it my mic?
maybe, no.
That mic's a little hot.
Anyways, we were just saying it was really awesome how, as a COVID-conscious band, there's music presenters that are dedicated to making spaces more accessible, and we hope in the future that conversations like this can continue to happen. So thanks to Wavelength and MusicOntario for tonight.
I know what I want, I know what I need, I know what I want, I know what I need. I know every word burn me and see how they lay. Be one turns like a dream. I'm figuring out my life, but don't know what this means. Go out for a drink, look through the crowd and have a me. Yeah, I care about you and how you feel. Let's work it out just like on TV. It's not what I want, it's not what I need. 'Cause everything changes when the waves hit the streets. I'm not here for you, I'm only here for me. 'Cause everything changes when the waves hit the streets. Boundaries move into place, and they were never there for you. So tell me you desire me. Tell me that you're sorry for ever hurting me. It's not what I want, it's not what I need. 'Cause everything changes when the waves hit the streets. I'm not here for you, I'm only here for me. 'Cause everything changes when the waves hit the streets. Waves hit the streets. 'Cause everything changes when the waves hit the streets. Everything changes when the waves hit the streets. 'Cause everything changes when the waves hit the streets. Everything changes when the waves hit the streets. All things change, maybe love wasn't for me.
Thanks all for listening. This next one's going to be our last song. It's called Sway. Yeah, we're Cut Sleeve. My name is Jen. This is Emmanuel, Leanne on the cajon, and Hillary on the bass. And if you want to chat, we'll be back there by the bar, the merch table. So it's a merch if you want to check us out. Thank you again.
Everybody stands against the wall. I see you and I crawl on my hands and on my knees towards oblivion, towards 29. Barely a person, and thank you, but no, I'm not alright. Then I snap back as you asked me for a dance, and I'm there inside the gymnasium, pushing at the chains, praying, Lord, oh Lord, please give me this. I beg you, bless me just this night. Play our song as we take flight before it's gone forever. Sway, sway, say called me up last night, and talking on the phone, she said to me, I'm pregnant and yes, I'm alone. I know my choices are my own, but I don't know if I should keep a baby child. A mom at 23, in my eyes still twirling clumsily at her high school dance, wishing at the chance to hold the hand. As the band strikes up tonight, play our song as we take flight before it's gone forever. Sway, sway, say you like me as your clammy hands run through the strands of my tangled hair. My ripped jean back on glory. Oh, sway, sway as I wrap my arms around your neck and press my face into your jacket. I'm not ready to grow old yet. No, my life is just begun now. Sway, sway, say you like me as your clammy hands run through the strands of my tangled hair. My ripped jean back on glory. I'll sway, sway as I wrap my arms around your neck and press my face into your jacket. I'm not ready to grow old yet. No, my life has just begun. So for this one night, let me love before we blink and it's all gone. Oh, whoa.
Thank you.